Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
I read that and I laughed out loud when I first read this article. I mean, I have no idea. It's not even clear what she's trying to say. My only observation here that I thought was pretty funny, this whole thing is just like, three brain cells, they're all fighting each other. Stuff. It's trying to be good propaganda.
We do not need another dissertation on lesbian queer theory. Like, we don't need it. Stop funding them. Stop admitting them to universities. Stop giving them honors. Like, all of it needs gone.
Take them down. Don't you know they gotta go? Fires rage. Time for change. I can see it. Now I know. Oh, make a sound. Get that horn a blow. I'm bound for the revolution road. It's the only place left for to go now. Blind eyes open wide. Take a peek way deep inside. Tell my friend, what do you see? Ain't but one route left now for you and me.
Welcome, everyone, once again to the Roundtable, the editors and publishers podcast of The American Mind here at the Claremont Institute. I'm your host, Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute, publisher of The American Mind and the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined by Spencer Clavin, assistant editor of the Claremont Review of Books and The American Mind, David Barr, managing editor of The American Mind, Matthew Peterson, vice president of education at the Claremont Institute and founding editor of The American Mind, and last but not least, James Pullis, executive editor of The American Mind. Well, we thought today we'd open by talking about the coup, the coming coup. I reference, of course, Michael Anton's article, which he wrote with a question mark after the coming coup. I will have our readers know and our listeners know. For The American Mind, which did quite well, has done quite well over the last 2 weeks, setting new traffic records for us, bringing us to a new base level. So we're in Mike's debt again. He did that originally with the Flight 93 election back in 2016. Rush Limbaugh was talking about it today on air and also talking about Mike's new book, The Stakes, America at the Point of No Return. We're in this weird place right now where, it seems to us, I think, that maybe the Democrats got a little ahead of themselves, a little too early for election ops. And so the COVID thing morphed into a tool to take down Trump. But that started in March. People are really over it right now, at least as a vehicle for continuing shutdowns, et cetera, especially as Sweden is fully open and the rest of Europe seems committed to no more lockdown. And you have Biden, talking about an executive order to have a national mask mandate. Anyway, I think the COVID thing has jumped the shark a bit, at least as a tool for manipulating American politics. And although it remains a very, very partisan issue, the split on it is really extraordinary about who's worried about coronavirus and who's not. And then also, the riots in the streets, the Black Lives Matter riots, the Antifa riots, that seems to have happened a little too early as well. And it's a tiger that the Dems want to ride that I think has gotten a little out of their control. How do you put a lid on it now that normal America thinks, maybe the crazy man in Lancaster who ran out of his apartment wielding a knife deserved to be shot because he was threatening a cop's life. And maybe you shouldn't burn down your city in order to quote unquote protest racial justice. All of which is a prelude to say they're a little nervous, I think, the Democrats. So they're pushing this new line, they have been for weeks, which is that contrary to what we've seen from their activities, whether they're getting behind closed doors and gaming out an election in which their side precipitates a regime crisis because their candidate, who's played by John Podesta, can't relinquish the presidency or relinquish his claim on it, even though he loses the Electoral College. This kind of thing's getting written up in magazines. Their line now is Trump is not going to leave. He's going to lose and he's not going to leave. We're going to have to drag him out. You all should be ready for a regime crisis precipitated by Trump and MAGA land. It's really an exercise in projection, we think, and it's an extraordinary thing. We, among other things, hope it really doesn't come to pass and hope that this crisis is headed off by some sort of resounding and easily identifiable victory. But given the trajectory of our national political scene, especially at the presidential level of late, that seems less likely than not.
Well, I'm not sure if I can say this on this podcast. You'll have to bleep me if I can't. How do you say the left has shot their wad on this a little bit? And
that's a gun reference.
Is that?
I thought that was a gambling term.
Yeah.
Oh,
was it gambling? I don't know.
Some kind of gambling.
But
That's not my understanding.
yeah, if it's overdetermined, the rule is if it's overdetermined, it's about sex. And anyway, the left. I mean, they did in some respect shoot their wad. The Marxists thought this was their moment. They thought that this was the time. The BLM Marxists and the Antifa Marxists and the Democrats thought that they could ride that revolution straight into the White House, which is always a fool's game. But whatever, they thought they were going to play it. It turns out, as you've said, that it was simply too early in the election cycle for people to be paying attention. When they did pay attention, because their cities were burning to the ground, it turned out they didn't like it very much. And so there was really no way to kind of head off the fact that America is still, at least notionally, democratic in its electoral politics. So they're going to regroup. I mean, this is the thing, is not to get complacent, because they showed with COVID already that they were capable of regrouping in a way that involves pivoting shamelessly, shameless, hypocritical pivoting. So when the riots happened, everybody was like, well, there's no way. I mean, I guess the lockdowns are over now. And the rest of us were kind of like, well, I mean, they're definitely going to just lock us back down. And lo and behold, indeed they did. Now this is the pivot, right? This is the pivot that we have to be here heading off at the passes. It's going to be a moral imperative that Biden should get into the White House, even if he doesn't have that sort of he doesn't check that minor box of getting enough votes to do it. So they're going to try to delegitimize the Electoral College, which has been a thing forever, but they're also going to play this thing. And you can see them doing it because you watch, they did this Transition Integrity Project, this kind of ostensibly bipartisan, but actually, coalition of never Trumpers.
That was my Podesta reference, yeah.
Yeah, right. That's your Podesta reference. And they had 4 scenarios, one of which was Podesta not conceding, 3 others of which involved basically Trump resisting a sweep. And the way that this has been framed in the Washington Post by the co-founder of the Transition Integrity Project is any other outcome besides a Biden landslide is going to lead to rioting in the streets. Mm-hmm. So there's a million ways you could report that. I mean, even if we believed that TIP was bipartisan, there's a million ways that you could report their findings. But why are they reporting in this way? It's because they're seeding the ground, as Anton outlines in this piece. They're seeding the ground to portray their own coup as Trump's coup, which is laughable, but is kind of the game that you do you do the thing that you're going to accuse the other side of, and then you engage in other sidism or both sidesism, right? Well, both sides are reviewing one another as kind of unconscionable, and so we're just kind of, as it were, responding in kind. We're buckling down to respond to the right, which is laughable, and we've outlined this on the site a great deal. But folks probably have other things to say, so I'll stop talking about that. I mean, this is going to be their last. I mean, timing-wise, it seems like this will be their last gambit, and they're really going to push it.
I've enjoyed watching them. I only have this one thing to say. I've enjoyed watching them deal with Trump's success in the Middle East this week.
Oh, yeah.
It's been amazing. This is amazing news, and they've done the kind of, at least the left media has done the ostrich maneuver of just trying to ignore it. But my father lives in the UAE, and what he reports is amazing. This is an amazing thing. Trump is a real man of peace, and Obama just had to breathe air to win the Nobel Prize. So I wonder what they'll do with Trump for his victory. And if the Saudis sign on to this, I mean, it's amazing. So
this goes in the category of a few of us were discussing. I don't think any of you were in on some side chat I had with somebody. And Anton has this term in his book called the celebration parallax, which is, if one group of people celebrate something, it's lauded as, yes, good, wonderful. But if a different group of people who are politically opposed celebrate it, then it's said to be a conspiracy theory, evil, et cetera, et cetera. Parallax is, if you're looking at a speedometer, analog speedometer right in front of you and your passenger's looking on it, it looks like it's at different places from where you sit. And his great example is, the immigration in the coming minority U.S., when the right worries about it, they're white nationalists and, bad people for worrying about new immigrants coming in and replacing white people. And then if the left celebrates it and really yearns for its coming, that's fine and good, and it will finally usher in justice and goodness, et cetera, in America. The other thing would be the what was the parallax? It was the I forget what we called it. Sorry. But it was another parallax where if Trump does it, it's bad. This is not new to any of our listeners who viewed this phenomenon, but if Obama had done any of these things, as David alluded to, he would have been a shoo-in for the Nobel Peace Prize if he hadn't won it already just for breathing. Whereas if Trump does it, it's bad, 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 bad.
Well, we got to enjoy the spectacle of the Atlantic right on cue, trotting out the Nobel Prize should be canceled because
right, exactly.
Obviously, it's now just obsolete and ridiculous. I mean, Graham Wood was the author of the piece, and I've known Graham for, I guess, a long time now that I'm of a certain age, and he's a smart guy and he's traveled around, and I have some respect for him. But it's just so easy to see how even like the best credentialed and even some of the harder working journalists can just get sucked into this vortex where if you're not for Trump, then you must be against him. And if you work for a magazine that is against him, then gosh darn it, that's the kind of content you'll be churning out. And the result is it's become very predictable and also quite boring. I mean, when flesh and blood human beings are reduced to cranking out pieces that a fairly well-trained AI could produce in like a tenth of the time, then what we used to think of as the news just sort of melts away. I mean, we've come to a point where most people know that the news is not something that's actionable for them in their lives, that if they read what is presented as the news, they're not going to be empowered or edified in a way that is going to sort of open doors of opportunity and possibility for them. And that sows a cynical attitude, and it's not just one that seeps into established media, but into social media. Hillary Clinton is tweeting, and her most recent tweet says, "We can have democracy, or we can have social networks that allow the spread of weaponized disinformation about our elections, but we can't have both." And in fact, we know that we can have both because the same social media companies that she's demanding act before damage is done are ones who have happily spread disinformation about everything from the coronavirus to what was really said and done at various pro-Trump protests and lots of other things. And we still have a democracy. So the way in which the media is being mobilized to force boring content onto people that does not give them any purchase in their actual lives under the pretext of news just seems to me to be unsustainable, regardless of the twists and turns of these final stages of the election. The elites continue to be flummoxed by the fact that people would rather come up with their own interpretation of events than turn to, the professionals for their information.
I really like Hillary Clinton is tweeting as the title of a segment, or perhaps just a kind of statement about the world. Hillary Clinton is tweeting, and it is much to our detriment.
Editor's note.
Go ahead.
Editor's note.
Oh, editor's note. Hillary Clinton is tweeting. Yeah, looking forward to that. By the way, if you guys aren't reading our editor's notes on the American Mind, I must say they're getting very, very good. So you're missing out. And James, back in the day when we were first starting this podcast, I think you said something that like we should have a segment called AIRT, as I recently tweeted. And I recently tweeted the true statement that at the gym that I've just subscribed to an outdoor gym because I was desperate. I couldn't bear it anymore. I had to have a bench press, and so I signed up for a outdoor gym. High tea. My tea was just like sitting unused in the bag that I keep it in. What? Anyway, I signed up for a gym. I couldn't not, and it's an outdoor gym. I overpaid. Whatever, it happened, and everybody there, it's me and a bunch of jacked Hispanic bros. They're just huge dudes, and they are talking. Obviously, I can hear them. I talk to them sometimes, and they are. Let me tell you, like they are not down with the Latinx, the Latinx, as Ryan says, the Latinx agenda. They're not down with intersectionality. They're not down with gender transgression. They're not down with any of the things that the left has on offer at the moment. And I would not be shocked if there were a Hispanic wave, or at least, the polls are showing a transition toward the right. And I tweeted this, and there have been a number of kind of now just arguments going on in my mentions about, well, this is purely anecdotal data. And somebody said something that I really like to, yes, imagine taking your worldview from the evidence around you in front of your eyes, as opposed to the prepackaged ideas of elite experts. That's really where we are, right? I mean, The Atlantic, God love them, they were once a great publication. It's become, I mean, it's astonishing what's going on over there. And James highlights exactly the right article. But it's all of these places, it's just kind of, at this point, scripted, rote progression of things that happen. Something happens that's good for Trump, what comes next. It's not happening. If it is happening, it's bad, and it has bad side effects. And also, we want the opposite, Orange Man bad. And I just don't think that that's sustainable. I genuinely think the digital age makes it too possible for people to gain their own access to information and to talk to one another about what's going on in front of their own eyes. It's kind of wonderful to see the elite grip on information primacy deteriorate.
I think that's well said, but I want to give a brief black pill as my only contribution to this segment. And let me just paint a scenario. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it could happen, in somewhat contradiction to what's been said so far. Although I have hope that Spencer's right. Tomorrow is Constitution Day. We know on the internet, right, for months, the siege of Washington is supposed to begin for 50 days, starting tomorrow. Same people who did Occupy Wall Street. Let's say they delayed a few days, but it starts this weekend. It's very hard to see how DC isn't going to be flocking. They're all going to flock there over the next month, up until November. They've already advertised that. So if we believe what they say, you're going to have increasing numbers of people in Washington trying to be part of this siege and create mayhem. We know that for months, then once election day unfolds, for months, every major organization on the left has been planning protests. That means this isn't but BLM and Antifa and the wackos who have been very successful so far. This is AFL-CIO. This is the big unions. This is Planned Parenthood. This is all the usual suspects. They haven't even been out in the streets, people. They haven't even done that yet. So imagine, right, you're going to have a sense of siege in DC that will increase, most likely, up until the election. And then after that, which we won't know the winner, of course, that night, because that's already done. We won't know the winner because of the mail-in ballots. And then you're going to have a time between November and January in which it's not just BLM Antifa, but it's every leftist organization in the country. They've already planned for over 1,000 locations, by their own admission, to be protesting. And in the midst of this, you have a very confused suburban elite in the broad sense of middle class trying to figure out how they should vote. And you have a nation that is really up in the air, flip a coin. And according to the polls right now, I don't believe the polls fully, but even giving some leeway for people who are quietly Trump, if you look at the polls right now, you'd have to say this is not going to go well. It's going to be messy. Both sides will dispute. Biden will win ultimately, and the entire country is going to be in a gigantic political conflagration in the next 6 months. And I have all kinds of alternative scenarios to lay out, but I think we should think very seriously about that and take the polls seriously as to where they are right now, even after the convention and the riots and everything else. And even after you calculate in some bias and all that, this is not a foregone conclusion.
No, not at all. I don't think any of us think that way about the upcoming election.
Yeah, and I should say I didn't mean it in any way to suggest.
I know.
With my
I
optimism.
I wasn't coming at you. I just wanted to sober things up.
Absolutely.
Spencer's leading a Latinx
Revolution.
Jim Bro revolution in favor of Trump.
Yeah, exactly.
You shouldn't go to the gym because according to Slate or who was it said you'll become a nationalist.
White supremacist. And I believe me, man. Like if that's true, I got them white supremacist gains. No, that's not true. I'm lying. It was a joke.
No, Spencer's not getting any gains.
You're sitting across the table. You can tell it's not.
No. He looks
just
healthy
in Yale's
as
gang.
No, I for those curious, you heard the revolution starting. Actually, Matt's recording from home, phoning in, and that was young Eleanor revolting against the upcoming Biden win. But before we get to the end of this segment,
a lot of rebels here right now.
Yeah, of course.
Forgive me.
I'll just plug for those of you who want to learn more about the coming coup and Anton's book and all that sort of stuff. You can go. There's an American Mind. We ripped the audio from a video interview I did with Mike Anton at our Lincoln Fellowship. So if you want to see the actual video, go to our YouTube page, Claremont Institute YouTube page. And also, if you DVR such things or want to get the clips off the internet, Mike was on the Weekend Sunday show with Mark Levin. And the first two segments were about the coming coup. And his last segment was about his book.
Journalists who lie, don't you live in heaven? Praised and crucified, just follow this pattern and see how they're only trying to make their name by spreading sickening lies about the ones who made their name and give us the name.
You know, sometimes there are these hit pieces that come along that are worth delving into, answering, and using as the occasion for some mockery and interlocuting. That's not a word, I don't think, but you all know what I mean.
Interlocution.
Thank you, Spencer.
I made that up too.
Yeah. This is an LA Magazine piece from Gene Guerrero from last
It's a peach.
from 6 days ago.
Truly, it's a peach.
Called Donald Trump's Politics of White Fear Have Roots in Southern California. Let me I'm going to read through some of this and then we're going to have some fun with it and then address some of it too, because it's worth at least responding to. As far as I can tell from the internet, no one has read this piece, so we're probably giving it too much attention, but it just offers up too much fodder or grist for our mill. So here we go. An hour east of Hollywood, where America's cultural fetish for stories of apocalypse and anti-heroes is made, the Claremont Institute lies in a nondescript beige building in the Pomona Valley. Created in 1979 to educate a new generation of conservative leaders through the study and reinterpretation of the American founding, the think tank has long peddled dystopian delusions, including that the U.S. faces an existential threat from a third world invasion, that diversity dissolves the country's unity, and that the many-headed monster of wokeness, identity politics, and multiculturalism seeks to destroy the American way of life. There are some links there. Of course, the third world invasion is a link to the Flight 93 election. In that, he's gotten grief for it, of course, from the left and from the sort of squeamish right. But Anton talks about the influx of third world foreigners not being the greatest thing for the health of the American Republic. The dissolving of the country's unity by diversity is a link to Ed Erler, a senior fellow of ours and a board member, his speech at Hillsdale called Does Diversity Really Unite Us? Citizenship and Immigration. Ed doesn't reference him, but of course, among others, he's in Robert Putnam's company, who wrote about the fact that if you introduce endless diversity into a republic, Putnam's famous social scientist, who sat on this finding for years because he was unsettled by it, but he found that the more diversity you introduce, especially through immigration, that departs from the sort of prevailing majority, ethnic, cultural, etc., the more breakdown of social trust you have. So it's not just some crazy myth. And then finally, the destroy the American way of life is a reference to or a link to Claremont board chairman Tom Klingenstein's Fight the Mob piece, which was a piece we published in American Mind, which was a reprint of a speech he gave in Orange County to a gathered conservatives. The next paragraph short, so we can all riff on that after I read it. The mission of the Claremont Institute is to save Western civilization, buttoned up President Ryan Williams, who's been with the Institute since 2005, declares in a welcome video on the Claremont's YouTube page. We've always aimed high, said I. First of all, I resent the comment that I'm buttoned up. Nobody can see me right now. We're not filming this podcast yet, but I have no tie on and my jacket is unbuttoned. So I don't know what Miss Guerrero is talking about. But, you know, the opening of this opens predictably, right? As if, I mean, do any of us disagree? I mean, who does she think she's writing to? I guess really just to the left, right? Does anyone in this country after the last couple months think that the many-headed monster of wokeness, identity politics, and multiculturalism seeks in some way to destroy the America that we know and love? I have a hard time believing many people will read that not in her camp and think, well, I mean, that seems reasonable to me.
That dimension of it is fascinating to me. It reminds me of, I believe it was Mayor Cuomo of New York who tweeted out the Paul Rudd video that he had obviously somehow kind of created. I don't know how he caused it to be created, but in any case, Paul Rudd, star of Ant-Man, among other things, an actor I kind of like, did this thing where he pretended to be like a "What's up, fellow kids," kind of a hokey, older guy trying to pander to the kids. And what he's telling you is you have to wear your mask, like you idiot children. How dare you not listen to your elders and your betters? I only raise it because watching it made me remark upon, like, at this point, I seriously wonder who this was intended to persuade. Who was not wearing a mask before this, who's supposed to now wear a mask? Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that was even on the table. Like, I wonder if that was even available as part of the conversation about making this thing. I wonder also about this piece. To what extent was it on the table that this should persuade anybody, as compared to that it should intimidate anybody? Because to me, this kind of was a progressive development. So it went in stages. Initially, I think with the whole alt-right thing, they thought that they had really found something. And so they were trying to expose some reality in addition to trying to make Trump supporters feel bad about themselves and make people feel bad for supporting Trump. Now, I don't actually know that there's anybody that this article is intended to persuade about the Claremont Institute. I don't think that anybody is supposed to be like, previously I thought the Claremont Institute, I never heard of them, or I thought they were harmless, or I enjoyed their content, and now I feel that they are neo-Nazis. That's just not a thought that's going through anybody's head reading this article, and I don't think that anybody involved in the production of it imagined that would be what it's for. The point of this is not just to make us feel bad, which of course is laughable because their arguments are so terrible and we stand behind every word that we write. Look, I mean, we're on the editorial team. We know that how painstakingly we scrutinize these pieces that we put out, this podcast that we create. I'm ready to stand before my maker and account for every word that's on this site. I should be perfectly frank with you. And so it doesn't even faze me to see this printed, good grief, to imagine that I would see this and think, oh, am I actually what? So that's not what this is about. And it's also not about our audience. So what is it about? It's about making people feel bad for standing by one another. They mentioned Jack Posobiec, who's one of our former fellows, and that's there was this Southern Poverty Law Center big report published on him and his supposed former infractions, and all of this stuff. I do not want to litigate that on this podcast because then we're playing their game, and their game is, should I think twice before defending my pals against these cretins? And the minute that you've even begun to think, well, is this maybe somebody that I should be careful about touching? They've won, because the great defender against bullying is solidarity, is camaraderie, and being in a squad, having pals that will have your back, even if they disagree with you about stuff. Like I don't agree with Jack Posobiec about everything. Like even if they disagree with you about stuff, having pals who will have your back when there is a bad faith attack made on your personal character on the basis of things that people disagree with about you, that's the greatest remedy and the greatest encourager of courage. And so that's what they're going after here. They're going after the idea that people might stand by one another in disagreement, but in solidarity, against this Leninist, Stalinist mob, to use some language from Jean Guerrero's own piece. So I find this just morally reprehensible, but also hilarious.
But dude, the thing where she calumniates us the most is when she implies that the whole staff likes Imagine Dragons. that pissed me off. I would like to litigate that here.
Here and now. Let's do it.
Yeah, I blame our producer, Jake the Cannon Gannon, for that, but we're not fans of that band.
I couldn't even pick out an Imagine Dragons song. If you play one for me, I would not be able to say that's
what's
Imagine
hilarious is she says the Claremont Institute's podcast cheekily debates the merits of eugenics. I feel personally attacked because I remember that discussion. And
it was episode 5 for those wanting to check the rule, check the history.
And as Ryan's saying, please go to episode 5 and listen to our discussion of eugenics. Very interesting, if I do say so myself. And features a clip from the band Imagine Dragons song Monster. I'm taking a stand to escape what's inside me. A monster, and it keeps getting stronger. And I read that, and I laughed out loud when I first read this article. I mean, I have no idea. It's not even clear what she's trying to say. My only observation here that I thought was pretty funny, this whole thing is just like, 3 brain cells, they're all fighting each other. Stuff. It's trying to be good propaganda. I mean, I could write better propaganda against us, obviously.
There's also it's so evident that she is not engaged with the history of the Institute or some of our quote unquote greatest hits of writing, the way we've engaged and been out in front of any I think think tank nonprofit in the United States in the past few decades and championing the principles of the Declaration, the thought of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, this reminds me a little bit of what we endured with the Google deplatforming some months ago, where we had to remind them what we're all about, and then they say, well, sorry, and then they lift it. And so it was so poorly researched that her editor should be ashamed of him or herself for even having run this.
As important as it is for us to expeditiously pound a stake through the heart of vampiric blather like this, I think part of the defense that needs to be made is on behalf of of readers and self-respecting Americans everywhere. Pieces like this are designed to short circuit and sabotage a proper reckoning with what the elite in America has done to America for the past 20 plus years. It is part of, whether intentional or half intentional or conscious or subconscious, a massive effort to distract and deflect and distort and twist reality, to create a reality distortion field so powerful that the illusion that people like us are evil will distract people away from reckoning with what has been done to their country by an elite that any sensible observer recognizes has floundered in the face of events for now going on several generations across every field of human endeavor in public and private life, with the possible exception of technology. Although I think now you can find people all the way across both ends of the political spectrum who would agree that in fact the technologists have also blown it at the elite level. They don't understand what world they've unleashed. They don't understand what world they're exiting. People get so bent out of shape. Donald Trump doesn't respect our institutions. What institutions? Who's running those institutions? Should anyone who's running those institutions merit respect today? It's that team that's imagining dragons, if I can say so on this podcast.
Yeah.
They accuse us of spinning these apocalyptic fantasies, which are so absurd and deranged that only, buck-toothed, shack-dwelling racists could possibly believe, when they're trying to perpetrate the greatest fraud and illusion on the American people that they can come up with. Because no matter how big the illusion is, it can't cover the crimes. It can't cover the excesses. It can't cover the failures. It can't cover the institutional idiocy. It can't cover the cowardice. And so it stretches and stretches and stretches. And if they could blot out the sun with it, they would. And it's just the goal is to suck as much oxygen as possible out of the room so that we can't talk about what it is that they've done and haven't done, and the cost that we all pay for it.
It's so true. And you know what? Like, in the digital unleashing of all of the frustration that you are expressing, James, like when suddenly it was possible for people to gather together across the country and make one another aware that they were not the only people who had felt the terrible effects of our failed ruling class, of the abject failure of everybody who was supposed to teach us true things, who was supposed to help us to, make an economy that made any sense, who was supposed to teach us the value of morality, right? All of those people had failed so terribly. And when it became possible for us to compare notes about that, to gather online and gather on the internet, yeah, there was a lot of rage in that online gathering, and there was some ugly stuff that came out. And do you know who went out and waded into that ugly stuff when nobody else would touch it and say, you know what, this is probably in excess, this is probably ugly, this is probably we shouldn't do, but this we will elevate, we will take this and we will shape it and give it an editorial voice and give it clarity. Do you know who did that? Us, the Claremont Institute. We went out there and we waded through some of the stuff, some of the just pure raw energy that emerged in the wake of this sudden unfolding of American frustration. Like, nobody else was doing that. There was no other voice. There was no other publication where you could find the newness of that. And the excitement of suddenly realizing that there was a new movement going on the right. Nobody else, nowhere else but the American Mind could you find that. Why? Because everybody else was cowed by garbage like this. Everybody else saw that there were labels being slapped willy-nilly across this vast swath of new voices. Some of them crazy, some of them kooky, some of them great, some of them exciting, right? All of that was put into a giant box called undesirable, deplorable, alt-right, do not touch. And for exactly the reason that you say, James, because they did not want us to understand even that it was there. It wasn't that they didn't want us to approve of it, because God knows we don't approve of all of it, right? We've said quite strenuously on this podcast that a lot of it is stuff we don't approve of. But they didn't want us just not to approve of it. They didn't want us to understand that it was happening. Why do they hate us? They hate us because here at Claremont, we're the only people who are admitting that it's going on and asking what we can do about it that will be faithful and true to the ideals of 1776 and 1789. And that is what they cannot abide, and they have to destroy us.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. I mean, look, what we have done is try to look and explore the landscape manfully, which means in an open way that's brave, courageous, and looks around and tries to tell people what the hell is actually going on. And it's a little too easy to take this little piece by LA Mag, which isn't even one of the major organs of the Eye of Sauron. But it's a little too easy to look at it. But the idea that people are still afraid of what these institutions think of them when we're trying to avoid a regime crisis, when we're in a situation in which you have a civilization, a culture, and a polis, a regime that's about to flip over, could flip in any direction and collapse, it is ridiculous. And the kind of bravery we need is such that we should be scoffing at these kinds of articles. And I just wanted to highlight like two sentences here. They say last year, the Claremont Institute awarded the fellowship to Jack Posobiec, a Pizzagate conspiracy theorist with ties to neo-fascist groups, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, if you're halfway sentient as a human being in politics in America, you know the Southern Poverty Law Center is just a shill for the left. And when I read this, I just think Jack Posobiec, who, has been in all kinds of belligerent politics for a long time, who's been on the level for a few years doing some amazing work, and who's, a good guy trying to live his faith, has his honeymoon in the Holy Land, and he's somehow a neo-fascist Nazi. He's also the guy who kicked out Richard Spencer from Crazy MAGA World in the beginning. I mean, it's complete and utter bullshit. And then the next line is what really cracks me up, though. The Institute, us, the Claremont Institute, 40 years plus history. We teach and publish new takes on America's founding. New takes on America's founding that whitewash history, insisting the country was never racist and those who otherwise seek to annihilate the United States. And what's hilarious is, maybe our audience doesn't know, we have 40 years of scholarship of people who helped to resurrect the reputation of Abraham Lincoln, who not that long ago in American society was not seen as a hero, was not seen as a prudent statesman. And this idea that, whoever this nincompoop is writing this article is going to dictate to us who's good, who's not, who's giving new takes on American society. I mean, it's asinine. It's not even worth refuting. But as James says, it is dangerous because these are the sorts of useful idiots that are going to be a part of the purge that's coming, that they all want to press the go button on in the next 6 to 9 months.
Well, I did want to take up this one, a few more things from this article from Miss Guerrero, who's a NPR contributing some sort of something, and then also writing here in LA Magazine. She's also, the reason for this piece is she's plugging her new book, Hate Monger, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda. So you get a flavor of
Wait, we're getting more of this delicious content to come? Oh my, I'm so excited.
The book, yeah.
Oh, everybody.
I'm sure it'll be must-reading.
Yeah, exactly.
So she points out the obvious, which most of you know, dear listeners. The Institute was founded by students of the political scientist Harry Jaffa, who in the 1960s helped radicalize the Republican Party through his participation in the presidential campaign of the right-wing zealot Barry Goldwater. She loves, I mean, there's so much adjectival editorializing in here. Writing the lines of his acceptance speech, that is Goldwater's, at the 1964 Republican National Convention, quote, "Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice." Jaffa was a prolific author and scholar of Abraham Lincoln and other founders. He likened political correctness to Leninism and Stalinism. Well, political correctness comes from Leninism and Stalinism, so I don't understand what the problem is.
Connected.
Shocking revelation. Yeah. But she left out the paired phrase that Jaffa wrote for Goldwater. He did write "extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice," but he also wrote, I think the line was, "And I will also remind you that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue." And Jaffa always maintained that this pair of phrases were perfectly Aristotelian. His point being extremism and moderation, of course, have to do with the circumstances, and extremism in defense of injustice is unjust, but it depends on what object you're pursuing and what means you're using to pursue that object, the sort of base ideas of political philosophy. Then Matt in the last segment, Matt quoted this whitewashing history. She claims we're whitewashing history in a link to Jaffa's essay, "The American Founding as the Best Regime," which you all should check out. You can look it up on ClaremontReviewBooks.com. In which he argues it's the best practical regime in a modernity transformed by monotheism, and one that makes fellow citizenship possible in a small R republic, despite us having differing views on the state of and salvation of our souls. So solving that political theological problem, or at least lowering the temperature on it. Her last line for that paragraph is, it's about us, of course. Its scholars launder white supremacist ideas through the language of heritage and the self-aware performance of erudition. Well, I mean, guilty as charged.
Yeah, I mean,
we're erudite.
My whole brand is the self-aware performance of erudition.
No, I mean, Jaffa's scholarship has been a sort of standing refutation for the philosophical or moral legitimacy of white supremacy. And we all follow him in that. So I don't know what the hell she's talking about. There's no citation there, of course. It's just rank innuendo and defamation.
Ryan, could she give an argument against white supremacy? Like, would she be able to philosophically argue against such a thing?
No, I doubt it. I mean, I'm sure she's fully subscribed to the notion that it's all a matter of perspective and narrative, and there is no truth. So if that's true, it's all a matter of will. So if the white supremacists carry the day, she's screwed. She's disarmed in front of them.
Well, and also I'm sure she's fully bought into the narrative that the color of your skin now determines your camaraderie and collaboration with the color of the skin of the people, however many hundreds of years ago, that committed X or Y wrong or X or Y good thing. So that too, I mean, we shouldn't back away from this, right? That in itself is the language of discrimination. And like Satan doesn't care which color of skin the discrimination is against. Like it's all the same damn thing. And as we have been stressing over and over again in this troubled time, you know, there is only one antidote to that. And that is the statement that all men are created equal. There's literally only one philosophically coherent argument against white supremacy, Matt, and it is the American ideal, which we at Claremont defend. So the notion that we are somehow the great, you know, originators of racialism in the U.S., when Jean Guerrero and the people, you know, who write for LA Mag are the ones who are telling us that we are all completely defined by our race. You know, that is particularly galling and quite amusing. I will also say, I mentioned in the previous segment that I feel strongly that I can stand behind every word on the American Mind. You know, that is because I am our resident pedant and am spending all of this time. No, I'm here spending all of this time like copy editing these pieces. She is not copy editing this. This is a poorly written piece. That alliteration to which you allude is only the beginning of the kind of like grammatical infelicities that pervade this piece. And so from my position as resident pedant, let me just say, like, not good prose.
It's interesting, Spencer, and a nice transition to my next point. You bring up skin color and content of character versus color of skin. So she says the following. I bring it up because it's pretty funny, among other things. And it offers the thing she leaves unsaid is pretty revealing and must be intentional. So she writes, in 1994, deeply unpopular Republican Governor Pete Wilson won re-election, which is funny.
Love it.
By blaming all of the state's problems on a migrant invasion. Proposition 187, launched that year in Orange County by people fearing a third world takeover, targeted social services for undocumented migrants, including public school for migrant children. The prop was later found unconstitutional. It's true. This is another example, an early example of courts just at the snap of a fingers evaporating what was a fairly popular public constitutional amendment in California, leaving aside the propriety of amending our Constitution by popular vote. But that said, but what she doesn't mention is, the unpopular Governor Pete Wilson, who won re-election, 2 years later in 96, the California Civil Rights Initiative was passed, which prohibited state government institutions from taking into consideration race, sex, or ethnicity in public employment, contracting, and education. She doesn't mention that at all. It was modeled on the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which at its best, our colleague Chris Caldwell has documented the ways in which it has not been its best for many, many years. At its best, wanted to fulfill the promise of a colorblind constitution and the equal protection of the laws for all, regardless of skin color, etc. So, it's just another way of showing how deeply confused and sort of turned around Ms. Guerrero is on modern American politics and the sources of its claims to justice and morality, whether they be right or left. So we're done with that. Oh, one last honorable mention. Any of you can jump in, but I did just want to bring up the alliteration because it's funny. So this is about Stephen Miller, among other things. Stephen Miller and us, as I mentioned, she has a book on Miller, and she offers us the following. I just offer it for our listeners' amusement. California conservatives like Miller and Tucker Carlson have mastered the art of conflating people of color and their allies with welfare-guzzling criminals. I don't know that they've mastered that art. I don't see them doing it that much or in those terms. But anyway, dog whistling, demonizing, and declaring doomsday in response to anything threatening the dominance of white men. You can't get that kind of writing for free, folks. LA Mag charges you dearly for it. All you got to do is just shake your head.
Well, it's got to be said that, what is the prevailing alternative to what we offer? What is the most powerful voice with the biggest megaphone screaming out an alternative to what we're bringing to the table? And what it is whiteness is evil. What it is the only way that you can emancipate yourself from being defined by your genetic code or the color of your skin or whatever, name your basket of characteristics, is by allowing a self-selected elite to decide what your identity really is and to follow them and let them master you and master your life in its smallest particulars. That's the alternative. Sometimes, this position is described as progressive. And as far as I'm concerned, progressive means you're advancing down a road. It does not mean in order to be who you truly are, you must become that which you are not. And that sort of twisted logic, which has arisen to almost a religious level over the course of history in the West, is something that you see among a certain stripe of technologists who say, well, our human destiny is really to transcend our very humanity. Like only then can we truly be free. But really, what being human really means is to gain enough power to cease being human. And you see exactly the same kind of impulse among this very vocal constituency that I'm talking about, who in effect says the only way that America can be what it really is for it to become what it is not. And we are the only ones who can fulfill the promise of America by, in fact, busting out of the crusty old skin, shedding the skin of America and having something entirely different and new sort of ooze out, glistening into the light. That is the primary alternative that is burrowing its way through our institutions, burrowing its way until recent executive orders stood in the way, through our federal bureaucracy, and is sending out brainworms to burrow through the heads of millions and millions of Americans who are now so upside down and sideways as a result of 20 plus years of manifestly failed leadership, that they're willing to believe almost anything that purports to explain their predicament in one sentence or less. That alternative is one that deserves a sense of urgency and deserves a manful anger and deserves a concentrated fire of criticism, which we're providing. And, of course, we welcome others who would provide it and who will entertain it and who will share in it and participate in it. But it takes work, and it takes a certain sort of courage to push the conversation in that direction. And it will attract enemies. And the kinds of enemies who it attracts are the ones who are holding up the megaphone and ready to press it to your ear and scream into your head as loudly as they can that there's something wrong with you and only they can fix it.
Yeah, it's well put, James. It's a nice capstone to this segment. And we'll finish up with some lighthearted political science.
Don't call me white. Don't call me white. Don't call me white. Don't call me white. The connotations where mine has been. Could it be some magic?
Well, I wanted to open this segment with a bit of a story for everyone. A story full of drama, passion, reason at its highest. That is the story of the world's largest social science conference and professional association, the American Political Science Association. So we, for our sins, dear listeners, since the late 70s have been going and holding panels at the American Political Science Association's annual meeting. It's noble work. We're sort of this oasis for serious political philosophy and consideration of America amidst normal, run-of-the-mill, and increasingly woke social science these days, which is often either very quantitative and abstruse, partly because of that, primary voting patterns amongst Democrats in New Hampshire in 1997, that kind of stuff. Very narrow questions that can be proved, quote unquote, using quantitative methods, or what's increasingly sort of ethnographic, very postmodern stuff, about sort of like transing video games, the role of trans identities in the video gaming community, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of the research, scare quotes, of which consists of someone playing video games while being trans or et cetera. I mean, I'm being a little extreme with that example, but it's not that far off, some of it.
Driving while black, playing video games.
Right. It's all very identity inflected, and a lot of it these days. So many, many years ago, actually even before the Claremont Institute was regularly going as an institution because it predated us, to the American Political Science Association. So Leo Strauss died I think in 73. And then in 1975, I think it was 5 or might have been 74, a lot of his students and others petitioned the APSA to set up the Leo Strauss Dissertation Award. Our intellectual godfather in many ways and guide and friend and perpetual scholar and writer for all things Claremont, Harry Jaffa, objected to the establishment of this award. Jaffa was one of Strauss's earliest grad students, first at the New School in New York, and then he followed him to Chicago. And Jaffa's objection was manyfold. First, he said, Strauss himself had said that political philosophy is kind of a corpse, or it's probably dead. And he was one of the few who was trying to revive it. The political science profession he mocked profusely, or sort of disdained profusely for not being able to take the age-old questions of truth, wisdom, natural right, these questions that were brought into their full flowering earliest by the Greeks and then picked up by subsequent great thinkers. This sort of study of the most important things as Strauss saw them was routinely mocked, dismissed out of hand by the modern political science profession. Among other things, they thought you really couldn't reason as a social scientist about what ought to be. You could only talk about what is. And so there was this disjunction between justice, as it was formerly understood, and actual science, in scare quotes, of political science and social science. So Jaffa raised a stink about this. He said, what does it mean to honor political philosophy and honor Leo Strauss if not only the profession disdains his whole project, and there's even a bunch of disagreement amongst his students, East Coast Straussianism, West Coast Straussianism. This is inevitably going to lead to the politicization of this award and the awarding of it to all manner of people who Strauss not only would have not considered third rate, let alone first or second rate, but he raised the other point. Any of Strauss's books, had they been submitted as a dissertation to such an award committee, would have been laughed out of the room, it is likely. And his main point was this is a political association. It's ruled by its members. It ought to be ruled by majority rule. That's how associations work. You sort of agree to disagree on certain things so that you can preserve peace, but that rarely leads to truth. Peace is not the result of relentless truth seeking, the calling of Strauss's life. Peace is the result of agreement, which means setting aside certain hard truths, which should be the business of real political philosophy. So Jaffa thought that this would inevitably become a political exercise, not an exercise in political philosophy or the honoring of political philosophy, and thus it would be a standing betrayal of Strauss's whole life project. And he was completely vindicated. Matt is going to read for us this year's recipient of the Leo Strauss Dissertation Award to honor the best dissertation in political philosophy. Take it away, Dr. Peterson.
I'm sorry, I was just playing guitar. You were talking about all this smart stuff. But if you want to hear what's really smart, you will hear about the Leo Strauss Award this year. The winner, Elena Gambino, is an assistant professor of political science at Rutgers. And, like many scholars do, she works at the intersections of feminist, queer, and critical race theories. And, it's amazing what she's done. I mean, she's looked at how political coalitions seek to contest and repair the inequalities that underpin modern political communities, and how they imagine radical futures premised on racial and sexual accountability. Accountability that I presume needs to be regulated by the authorities. So she won this award for a dissertation called Presence in Our Own Land, Second Wave Feminism and the Lesbian Body Politic. And the award committee said it was a deftly argued and exciting intervention in and contribution to contemporary political theory in the history of feminist thought. It pervasively, pervasively challenges the dominant narratives of progress, according to which second wave feminists engaged in exclusionary politics of identity. They weren't pure enough, in other words, that were corrected by subsequent generations of feminist thinkers. And what Gambino shows is how lesbian feminists, beginning in the late 1970s, which is when some of us, including me, were born, theorized and practiced a deeply intersectional politics. This is before their time, right? Intersectional politics that rested not on essentializing identity categories, but on structures, relationships, and institutions capable of promoting coalition building as a form of publicity. Anyway, I just wanted to mention one or two more things and I'll shut up. She really wanted to turn to the pages of people who haven't been recognized in literature, like Sinister Wisdom, a lesbian feminist magazine in the 70s of poems, stories, essays, visual art, a lot of reflection and self-assessment, probably a lot of self-assessment. And she went to these original sources in a groundbreaking way, really. And at the end of the day, Presence in Our Own Land, second wave feminism, and the lesbian body politic contributes critical conceptual resources to the field of political theory, while offering exceptionally timely strategies for any politics committed to solidarity across difference.
Yeah, I can't think of a greater vindication of Jaffa's complaints about this award than this award. Now, we should say that this is the worst one yet by a sight. But nonetheless, the man was a prophet writing in, I believe, 1974, or at the latest, 1975.
It's like we knew.
I do like
reading it then, and now, yeah, I read this and I do just want to play, work on playing "Wish You Were Here."
Well, it's like unbelievably warmed over. I mean, this stuff was hot and sexy, and there was a claim to like novelty, or like, hey, what if we paid some attention to this? 30 years ago, Michel Foucault, this is a long time ago. And the insistence among the established elites, whether in academia or elsewhere, is not just like, here's something that deserves some attention that it's never received, or here's even like an interesting place that grad students could go to write some dissertations, since everyone's written a friggin' dissertation on everything, and you now have to we're out of footnotes and raws to write dissertations about, so maybe we could do this, right? It's not even that. It's that this is the most single important issue area and way of seeing the world to focus as much attention and resources and honors and praise and respect for on out of everything there is to talk about and think about and write about and do something about. That's the claim. And it just flies in the face of reality, which is, we have seen our form of government collapse at the hands of people in charge, self-dealing, overeducated imbeciles who don't understand what world they're in, don't understand what world they've unleashed, have no clue about how to manage the transition between the sort of industrial civilization to a digitized one, much less how to do it with keeping our form of government intact. That's the most pressing issue that we're facing. That's something that we, devote time to on our, through our publications when we're not busy trying to beat the madness down with, one hand, using the other one to do some constructive work as well. And as much attention as people want to put into, critical theory, and God knows there are plenty of people out there who feel some real personal connection to this material, and a lot of it is sort of personality driven and full of research, and like I get it. I understand why that is like a manifestation that has a presence in American scholarship and in American life. But please stop pretending that this is the most important thing that we need to focus on, that we need to reorient our civilization and our regime around it, and that if we do, we'll be better off, or that we'll be saved from the perils that we're hurtling toward. It ain't going to happen. That matrix of fantasies is not going to deliver us from the predicaments that we've been placed into. And people who push and push and push it as if it would, I think, they're not just kidding themselves, they're kidding the rest of us, and there's going to be hell to pay.
Yeah.
Before you do, Spencer,
Sure.
David, do you want to say something?
Oh yeah, it was just a little lighthearted thing. We, I think all of us around this the table have heard stories on the difficulty of Straussians in academia. So I kind of chuckled to myself that thinking about her having to distance herself from the award, like, hey, look, guys, like I didn't ask for this Leo Strauss stuff. It was just, bestowed upon me, but at the same time, I'm so grateful for the award.
I needed the $750, which is the prize associated with it. Yeah.
Well, right. I mean, like what James is saying, I think really puts the finger on it. And look, you know what? It's not that interesting. Like, this is the deep secret, is that we kept insisting, like, oh, if we just open the box of all the forbidden identities in American life, there will be this huge untapped potential of like ways that people live that is outside the norm. Like, it's completely boring. There's like one or two things that you can say about gay people and lesbians. It's like a little bit different from the way that heterosexual people live their lives, and everything else is a complete snooze fest. I mean, my goodness, I want to kill myself when I hear. No, I'm not kidding. I'm kidding, but I'm not kidding. Yeah. I'm kidding, but I'm kidding, but I'm not kidding. Like, yeah, right. Thank you. It's not worth it over this. I'm gonna, after we finish this podcast, I'm going to ask you guys like what the name is for that image online of just like a wizened old, like dehydrated person, and the when you post it to convey that you're just completely weary. Like the minute that Matt started reading that description of this lesbian whatever, like politics of nonsense, like I felt as if all of the moisture had drained out of my face, and I was just like, and it's not just that this won't solve the problem. It's that like, and this is an actually interesting critique that somebody could make of, say, for example, musical theater in America. If you really wanted to do a sustained study of this, like if you want to go into musical theater, note that all the great musical theater in America is written by gays yearning to be able to express themselves when they can't. It's all about sublimating your homosexual desire into some heterosexual story about, like, I want this woman, I'm a man that I want this woman that I can't have. Well, why can't you have it? Because secretly you're a gay person, like, writing this musical, right? Like that is interesting. And that is why, like, such a disproportionate number of gay people have been successful in the American arts, is because, like, they were forbidden from expressing themselves directly. That's why one of the most interesting relationships in The Maltese Falcon is between Cairo and Wilmer, the like, weird gay foreigner and the hired gun. Like, it's because it's sublimated, and once it's not sublimated, it comes out into the light, and it's like blah. It's completely nothing. And instead of acknowledging that and realizing like, oh, well, that's done, we sort of figured out that we can maybe have gay people be allowed to be gay. Like instead of acknowledging that, what we just did is just drilled down into the idea that this was somehow uniquely interesting and uniquely fascinating, uniquely exciting. All the while this meteor was hurtling at our republic. And as James indicates, like that is what needs addressing right now. And we do not need another dissertation on lesbian queer theory. Like, we don't need it. Stop funding them. Stop admitting them to universities. Stop giving them honors. Like, all of it needs gone. And this is the thing that, like, we just can't own up to.
No, I really don't think we can top that ending. No, that's good, Spencer. I should point to everyone too, at least. So this excellent Jaffa essay that he wrote, it was an expansion on a letter he wrote to the APSA objecting to this award, really holds up well and is deep and profound in many ways and contains a lot of wisdom, and is, Jaffa would admit, is sort of piggybacking off the wise Strauss in his critique. Can be found in the volume Crisis of the Strauss Divided. I objected to that title at the time, but it carried the day. Don't blame me. Essays on Leo Strauss and Straussianism, East and West. But we're going to publish it in some form, in its really original form, at some point in the coming days on the American Mind for your perusal. So you should go check that out, and we'll boost it on socials, etc., and link it to Rutgers New Brunswick celebration of her award, not to pick on Miss Gambino, but just to ride the wave of sort of the frustration expressed by a lot of laypersons that echoes the sort of long critique that both Spencer and James laid down, which is really we're spending time on this, we're awarding this at one of our prestige institutions of quote unquote American political and social science. I think we have better uses for our time. Well, thank you all for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to learn more, visit our websites at americanmind.org, claremont.org, and claremontreviewbooks.com. Don't forget to rate, review, 5 stars, please. Share and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to the production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Annalisa Lee. And thank you all. We'll talk to you next week.
Immanuel Kant was a real pissant who was very rarely stable. Heidegger was a boozy beggar who could drink you under the table. David Hume could out-consume Schopenhauer and Hegel. And Wittgenstein was a beery swine who was just as sloshed as Schlegel. There's nothing Nietzsche couldn't teach about the raising of the wrist. Socrates himself was eminently...
Ryan, I thought of you because we bought catnip for our cat, and he didn't go for it.
Really?
He was not into it at all.
Yeah.
So that makes me feel sad every time I think about, because I feel that whenever you tweet something that's like, this is Spencer catnip, it's like perfect,
Right.
And so I feel
Well,
sad
that's too bad.
that my cat does not recognize the benefit of catnip.
He's immune to the sauce.
He is.
That's good in a way. He's a moderate cat.
Yeah. In no other respect is he moderate, but in that respect, yes, he's moderate.
Matt, are you holding a guitar?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
I was hoping
that's
that
That's a lie.
A little bit. Not
That's a
even
lie.
remotely holding a guitar. That was very
hoping that
powerful,
would
James.
come in.
Come on.
I like the only songs I know.
Come on, play "Come As You Are" for us, Nirvana. You know that song that everyone learns. Do 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 do. Okay, sorry.
Weird.
All right.
My daughter has it. Yeah.
All right.
Alice in Chains.
Like wish,
That Pink Floyd?
yeah, Pink Floyd "Wish You Were Here" is kind of like how I open things, right?
Yeah.
Down.
All right. We all ready?
Ready.
Sorry.